So we have the honor today of having Roman Pichler with us, an expert in product management. He's going to talk for 30 minutes about the product owner role, and then we're going to have 30 minutes to be able to ask him questions on whatever you feel, questions that you have about the role or maybe the responsibilities within the role that you need clarity on. So I'm going to hand it over to Roman.
Yeah, thank you, Sheena. Thanks for the warm welcome and nice to be with you. So, as Sheena said, I'd like to give a talk. And so I've got a few slides prepared and I'm trying to share them now with you. So hopefully you can see a title slide that says tips for effectively applying the product owner role. I'm sorry. Yes, that's what I'd like to talk about. Now, the product owner role has been described, in many books. And so the first book that comes to mind that talked about the product owner role is Agile Software Development with Scrum by Ken Schwaber and the late Mike Beadle. And I believe this book was published in 2002, so nearly 20 years ago. But still, in my work, I find there's a fair amount of confusion about the product owner role. Who should play this role? What's the authority or what level of empowerment do product owners need? What's their responsibility? Do you need a product manager and a product owner? How do those two roles work together? So those are some of the questions I'd like to try and address today. So going back to the source, as you probably know, the product owner emerged within the Scrum framework, and the latest edition of the Scrum Guide that tries to summarize what the essence of Scrum is suggests the following definition of the product owner role. Well, maybe it's not so much a definition, but at least it states that the product owner is maximizing accountable for maximizing the value of the product. I've got trouble reading what's written on my slide. So accountable for maximizing the value of the product. And so I thought a good place to start then to discuss the role and its responsibilities and authority would be to look at what does it mean to own a product? What is a product? And this seems to be a rather trivial question, but I find that many organizations don't have a shared and clear definition of what a product is, particularly what a digital product is. And I think when that happens, it becomes particularly challenging to effectively apply the product owner role. So what might be a product? My suggestion is it's an asset. So in the context of software products, digital products, it would be software. A piece of software plus possibly additional artifacts. And this asset has to create value for a group of people, users, and possibly customers, and the company that's developing and providing the product. So another way to look at this is to say a product is a value-creating vehicle. It benefits people, well, users, and then it benefits more people. That's the business, the company. And other assets, such as features and components, they're super valuable as well. But if an asset doesn't, have that value-creating capability, like a feature or component, something I'll come back to shortly, then I wouldn't call it a product. So for me, that's really the first thing to figure out. And then the next thing is to say, well, what does it then mean to own a product, right? I mean, product owner would suggest, the name would suggest that the person who plays that role should then own the product on behalf of the company. Well, for me, that means being empowered not only to make the tactical product decisions, but also strategic product decisions. So things around what problem should the product solve, or what benefit should it create, and who should be the beneficiaries. What's who's in the target group, and what are the product standout features and business goals, and how will the products likely to be developed, say, over the next 12 months? What are specific product goals? And then if that's the case, I think it's only fair, as the Scrum Guide suggests, to ask the individual to take responsibility for achieving product success. Now, that's in a way the theory, you could say. In practice, in my work, I find that when I meet people and they introduce themselves as product owners, then sometimes they own more than a product and sometimes they own less. And so there are, I think, 6 types of owners that I commonly encounter, and I thought I'd share them with you. So the first type would be the Scrum product owner. So I'm talking here about the ownership scope, how much you own. And a Scrum product owner, as I just suggested, in my view, has to own a product holistically in its entirety and to take charge of the strategic and the tactical product decisions. And by that, I don't mean that a Scrum product owner should be authoritarian or a product dictator or being coercive in any way. I mean, again, as you're probably all aware of, Agile and Scrum favor a highly collaborative work environment. And certainly in Scrum, one of the ideas is to have a sprint review meeting and look at a product increment together. Together, that is product owner, Scrum Master, developers or development team, stakeholders, and maybe users and customers. So it's a collaborative effort, and people's perspectives and views and ideas are very much welcome. But it can be, and again, you probably know this from your experience, it can be a fairly diverse and also large group. You think about stakeholders, you think about a development team, product owner, Scrum Master, and maybe selected users and customers, and you easily have somewhere between 15 and 20 people. And if these individuals, if that group can't make a decision and reach agreement, then there has to be somebody, that's at least my understanding of the Scrum framework, who can make that decision about the product and how to progress the product. And that would be the Scrum product owner. And hence, the person needs the appropriate level of empowerment. But not every product owner owns a product in its entirety. Sometimes I meet people who might call themselves a product owner, but actually after talking to them, I find out they own a feature. And a feature for me is an end user facing capability. So if you go to an online store, then that might be the ability to search for a specific product. To make this maybe more specific, if you go to Amazon.com and you look for, what shall we look for? A book. Let's look for Agile software development with Scrum. That feature that allows people, that the ability to, the capability, to search for specific products, I would suggest that's maybe more a feature than a product in its own right. It probably doesn't create sufficient value on its own for the users and for the business, for Amazon. And it's probably a step in a user journey. But it might be actually quite a complicated piece of technology. And somebody who owns such an end user facing capability, I would call a feature owner. This is not to be derogative in any way. It can be a very challenging and rewarding job to be a feature owner, but it's just different from being a product owner. A product owner is ultimately responsible for the commercial success of the product, or that the product generates also the desired business value. So as the product owner, I have to be aware of the underlying business model and how my product is monetized, certainly when it's a revenue generating product. I have to be aware of the entire market. I have to be aware of the competitors, and I should carry out competitive analysis. And so, I need to be clear on the product's value proposition. And this requires somewhat different skills, I find, compared to somebody who has ownership and carries out product management duties, but in a more focused manner, focusing on a capability or on a feature. So you could say the Scrum product owner is responsible for maximizing the value that the entire product creates, and a feature owner is responsible for maximizing the value of a feature. And similarly, somebody who owns an architecture building block, I would call a component owner. Just like a feature owner owns part of a product, a component owner does so. But this time it's a technical part. It's an internal building block in the sense of, say, a service or a collection of microservices or a layer or a component, software component, or maybe several software components. Might be, for instance, the persistence layer or the ability to store data and information to the cloud. Again, when you look at what is the responsibility of a component owner, I would suggest to maximize the value of that architecture building block, of that component. And a component owner, again, needs different skills, usually in-depth technical skills. And in my work, I've already mentioned it, I often find that component owners, feature owners, and Scrum product owners are all called product owners. But when that happens, there's a lot of confusion. And I remember running a workshop a number of years ago at a client here in the UK at the South Coast, a geodata company. And based on the prep work I'd done and the conversations I'd had with people, I was expecting between 5 and 10 people in the workshop. And I turn up and there are 25 people. So I was pleasantly surprised, but thanked everybody for their interest, but said, this is a workshop for the product owners. And so people turn around and say like, yeah, we know. And it's like, what? You possibly can't all be product owners. And people say like, oh, yes, we are. And so the reason was that the introduction of Scrum had started in development. Most teams at that time, development teams were component teams. So all those teams said, hey, we're now Scrum teams, therefore we need a product owner. Who shall be our product owner? And then usually it was the most experienced developer or the developer with the best architecture skills. But again, these individuals didn't own products, they owned components. And so as this shows, if you're not clear on what a product is, and if you're kind of a little bit loose when it comes to applying the terms, the role names, then a lot of confusion can arise pretty quickly. Then there's yet another owner type, and that is the safe product owner. I'll say a little bit more about the difference between the safe product owner and the product owner, the Scrum product owner, in a minute. But the safe product owner, that's my understanding, has has not as much authority and not as much responsibility as the Scrum product owner. And then we have two products that might make sense to extract, bundle shared assets into some form of a platform. And when that happens, we might want to assign an owner of that platform. I called that role here platform owner, even though the platform owner is a Scrum product owner. The only difference being that a platform owner, while the individual owns its platform or the product in its entirety, does require technical skills. And I would suggest in-depth technical skills, because the users who predominantly use the platform are likely to be the development teams that build the apps, the applications, the products on top of it. So we've got 5 owners here. What about the sticks? Well, we've got 2 products in a platform. That makes really 3 products. That's a small portfolio, a small product family. And then sometimes, probably not for 3 products, but certainly when this, if this portfolio, this product family grew, it would make sense, or it might make sense to assign a product portfolio owner, ask somebody to take responsibility for the entire group of products, and ensure that together they create as much value as possible. Yeah, and so sometimes I meet people who say I'm a product owner, but again, after talking to them, I find out they own several products and these products are related. So, there might be product owners, but in addition to that, they also have product portfolio management responsibility. Again, I think that's important to kind of separate out and just be clear on what is my role and, what do I really own? Again, the whole thing is not to create some form of division or say like, oh, the Scrum product owner is the only true product owner, is the best product role here on this slide. But just again, to help you reflect on, if you work as an owner, if you own a piece of software, what level of ownership do you have, or what scope of ownership do you have, I should say. How much do you own? The next thing I wanted to talk about is, ownership depth. And in order to do so, I'm using a simplified version of Mike Cohen's planning onion. So here we only have 3 layers: vision, strategy, and tactics. Vision describes the positive change you want to bring about with your products, the ultimate reason for creating it. Strategy is then the path to realize that vision. And the tactics will be the tactical decisions that you take along that path, the individual steps, and essentially describe the detailed product decisions that you might want to capture in a product backlog. So for me, a Scrum product owner has to have full stack ownership. So from the vision down to the tactics. So own more than just the detailed tactical product decisions, and own more than the decisions that essentially are captured in the product backlog. So that means taking responsibility of something like a product strategy that describes the value proposition and the audience, the target group, and the standout features and business goals of the product. I mentioned business model earlier. Product roadmap will be another important planning artifact. A Scrum product owner, in my mind, should use in order to formulate product goals, capture product goals, but also anticipate how the journey might evolve over, say, the next 9 to 12 months. Yeah. But not every product owner out there has that full stack ownership. And when we look at the safe product owner, then my understanding is that a safe product owner largely focuses on tactical detailed product decisions and the product backlog, or part of a product backlog. And that means somebody else has to own the strategy and the vision and be more outward facing, you could say, whereas the SAFe product owner is more like an inward facing role. And in SAFe, this role is the SAFe product manager. So, somebody who takes care of the vision. And as I said, maybe talks to users, customers, and does competitive analysis, watches out what the market does, if there are any new trends. Yeah. So essentially what SAFe has done here is taken the Scrum product owner role and redefined it, or introduced a new product owner role, unfortunately, I would say. And you can see the product owner full stack ownership, excuse me, a Scrum product owner has, is split. Why is it split? Well, to facilitate scaling. SAFe is a agile scaling framework. SAFe stands for Scaled Agile Framework. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. Apologies. And so, one way to scale and one way to facilitate that several product people can work on the same product and together collaboratively manage the product is to introduce such a strategic and tactical split. But that's not the only option and not always the best option. For some of you, it might be interesting to hear, and maybe you even know this, that the very first version of the Scrum framework that was shared in 1995, I believe, at one of the Uppsala conferences, and didn't use the term product owner, but rather the terms product management and product manager were used. Right. So originally the product role in Scrum wasn't called product owner, but product manager. Ken Schwaber changed it later, and Ken Schwaber is one of the two Scrum founders, and he's been mainly responsible for coining the Scrum terms. Ken Schwaber changed it later, and one of the key reasons was to emphasize the level of empowerment product people need in Scrum because of its collaborative nature. Yeah, I find it ironic that quite often these days I get asked, well, who's the product manager in Scrum, or where's the product manager in Scrum? It's like, why would you need one? The Scrum product owner is the agile product manager. That's it. Anyway, yeah. So Scrum product owners, in order to be able to maximize the value that their product creates, really have to have full stack ownership. At least that's my perspective. So having talked about ownership scope and depth, I thought it might be worthwhile to look at the interactions that Scrum product owners should have and maybe position the product owner role. So this allows me also to use a Venn diagram, which I think is always a good idea when you talk about product management concepts. So the Scrum product owner, for me, you should first of all interact with users and customers and have direct interaction with those individuals, or at least with selected users and customers. And the rule of thumb that I like to suggest is to be able to reach out and connect with selected users and customers at least once a quarter. And that might take by visiting people and observing people. It might take place in the form of inviting people to on-site sprint reviews. Or, these days, certainly here in the UK, with COVID cases rising rapidly again, in form of video conferences and maybe interviews with users. But I think it's really, really important to be able to talk directly to selected users and customers, to be able to fully empathize with them and really develop a deep understanding of their needs. What currently works for them, what doesn't work for them, what are the things they're struggling with? How could you further improve your product? Or what other offerings might benefit them? So it's a great way to learn more about their needs and how to address their needs. And of course, it's extremely valuable to use all the data, the user interaction data you have, and that your analytics tool gather for you. And for me, reflecting on sort of the last 15 years and 20 years of how product management has developed, I think, the amount of data we have available today is like a massive benefit. But at the same time, it can also be a drawback because, I can't empathize with data. I think data only tells you so much in addition to that quantitative science and using quantitative information, the qualitative aspect and interacting with human beings, with the beneficiaries of your product, I think is equally important. And then we have the business stakeholders. So those are individuals from different departments or business units, groups. For commercial revenue generating product, it might be a marketeer or salesperson, a service rep, somebody from support, maybe somebody from operations, maybe somebody from finance. I think it's extremely helpful to try and build good connections with those individuals, to be able and earn their trust, to be able to lead and guide and influence them in a positive way, and thereby try and create alignment. And I mean, one of the key challenges for Scrum product owners and generally for product people is the lack of what's referred to as transactional power, right? I mean, as Scrum product owners, we're not in a position to tell the stakeholders what to do. And the same is true for the development team members. We're not the boss, we're not their line managers. And, usually we can't offer any incentives or like a pay rise or bonus either. So then the only way to influence people and encourage people to move together towards a shared goal is to build trust. And so, again, it's a good idea to regularly connect with the business stakeholders and interact with them and involve them in important strategic decisions without making the mistake of catering for their needs and trying to please them, all of their needs, and trying to please them, and without making the mistake of trying to broker a weak compromise and agreeing on the smallest common denominator. And then the development teams, I think that's something where Scrum is quite clear about as a framework. And I'll say a little bit more about the right interaction with the development team on the next slide. But again, just to reiterate, even though the Scrum framework doesn't talk that much about users and customers, and doesn't really talk that much about the interaction with the business stakeholders, I mean, these are equally important partners for a Scrum product owner. And so I've seen Scrum product owners becoming a little bit, in a way, myopic and too inward focused, and spending more or less all their time with the development teams. And I think, when that happens, there's an imbalance. So it's kind of good to, it's good to support the development teams, and it's important to spend enough time with the development teams, but equally, it's important not to neglect the stakeholders and the users and customers. So having said that, Scrum talks quite a bit about the right interaction or right relationship between a Scrum product owner and the developers or the development team. I thought I'd sort of explore that in a little bit more detail, and also try and address the question of what kind of leadership should a Scrum product owner provide. And so here we have the 3 Scrum roles. And as you know, the idea is that, as you probably know, I should say, the idea is that the individuals who fill those roles should work together in a trustful and respectful manner. Well, that's really the basis for collaboration, right? It's hard to work together if we don't respect and trust each other. And you could also say that respect maybe in terms of accepting others, even if we disagree with their views, is the prerequisite for building trust. But anyway, so what are people really responsible for that fill these roles, and what's sort of the leadership focus? Well, for me, when it comes to the Scrum product owner, it should be ensuring that there is a shared and hopefully somewhat inspiring vision, that there's a clear strategy in place how that vision can be achieved. And there is a roadmap as an actionable plan that says this is roughly how the strategy will be implemented over the next 6 to 12 months, and anticipates maybe some product goals. And then ensuring that there's a product backlog, and this product backlog is ordered or prioritized, and that the stakeholders participate in the development process in the right way, and thereby collaborating with the stakeholders. And the development team, for me, should have design and technology leadership. And that means I very much see UX designers, UI designers as part of a development team. And also, same is true for architecture and testing skills, and people who have knowledge in those areas. And of course, in an agile Scrum-based context, a development team is self-organizing, so responsible for deciding who does what and how much work can be taken on in a given period in a sprint. And the Scrum Master, I forgot the shared responsibilities, user research. So I think it's really helpful to involve development team members in reaching out to users, interviewing users, observing users, but then of course, gathering feedback from users, be it in form of product demos, usability tests, or releases. Selecting the sprint goal is, again, you may well know this, a shared responsibility. There should be agreements between the product owner and the development team about what the purpose of the upcoming sprint is. And then finally, product backlog refinement, working on the product backlog, breaking large items into smaller items, again, is a a shared responsibility. So the development team members should actively support the product owner. And then finally, the Scrum Master for me has process and people leadership. What does this mean? It means that the Scrum Master offers process and method coaching, not only to the development team, but also to the Scrum product owner. But then in addition to that, to the stakeholders in the wider organization. So, I often see Scrum product owners who kind of feel they need to enlighten the stakeholders and tell them about how an agile development process works. And while that can be helpful, I really do think that's the job of the Scrum Master. The same is true when it comes to collaboration and collaboration issues. For me, the Scrum Master is somebody who should help the development team, the developers, but then also the developers and the product owner. But then also, the Scrum team and the stakeholders work together effectively. And finally, things around organizational development and change, be it introducing new roles and responsibilities, adjusting development and learning programs, or career ladders, or employee selection criteria, or establishing an effective product management organization, and maybe recognizing that product management, should be a dedicated department. It should be have adequate representation on the leadership team. That might also be a form of organizational development and change, and that's something Scrum Masters are responsible for as well. Now, why am I showing this? Because I think it's important to understand the Scrum product owner, and again, further position the Scrum product owner in the context of the other two Scrum roles, because these roles complement each other. But in addition to that, I find that Scrum product owners often kind of get dragged into the work of the development team, and particularly the work of the Scrum Master. So it's very common for me to work with product owners who don't have Scrum Masters, or whose Scrum Masters aren't adequately sufficiently available and adequately skilled. And so then there's a gap, and then it's kind of very tempting and to a certain extent natural for Scrum product owners to try and fill that gap and take on at least some of the Scrum Master responsibilities. But what that does is it makes a challenging job even more difficult. There's a lot to, there's product owners have a wide range of diverse tasks. Think about that full stack ownership. That means you need to do some strategizing and product discovery work, but you also need to help refine user stories. I mean, there's a lot on your plate. If you then, in addition to that, also take on some process and method coaching and some, sorting out collaboration and team development issues and organizational change issues, it's usually too much. And so something's got to give. And that's either the health of the product owner, and sustainable pace goes completely out of the window. People overwork themselves and ultimately, to their own detriment, or product owners neglect some of their core responsibilities. Often that's done around product discovery and product strategizing, because these are important but not urgent tasks, so we can postpone them until it's too late. Yeah. And so, this goes to show that for those of you who are product owners, really kind of try and focus on your role. Of course, it's good to care. Of course, it's good to wanting to help. But at the same time, it's also important to draw a boundary and say, this is how much I can do. And this is kind of where I have to stop to sort of protect yourself and ensure sustainable pace. And for those of you who are development team members or Scrum Masters, to understand maybe a little bit better how you can work with the product owner and support the product owner. So there's one more slide left, I think, and that is, just a little bit of reflection on what kind of skills might be helpful for Scrum product owners based on what I've shared so far. And again, this is a Venn diagram. So there are three groups of skills that I like to call out: tactical skills, strategic skills, and leadership skills. So tactical skills are skills around the product backlog and being able to stock a product backlog, prioritize a product backlog, order a product backlog, refine product backlog items, select a sprint goal together with the development team, generally work with the development team, maybe also have a little bit of technological understanding, or at least an interest, maybe being able to work with user personas, being able to choose the right method to test out ideas and validate product increments, usability tests, product demos. Early releases of early product increments come to mind. But then the strategic skills are equally important, assuming the product owner has full stack ownership. So things around product lifecycle management, vision setting, developing and validating a strategy, competitive analysis, business modeling, financial forecasting, product road mapping. And then leadership skills are interpersonal skills that I think are just as important as the hard skills. So things around goal setting, active listening, collaborative decision making and negotiation, maybe conflict resolution. I think these interpersonal skills, these people skills or leadership skills, as I call them here, they in a way help you bring the hard skills, the strategic and tactical skills to life. Now, I'm not showing this to frustrate anyone or make anybody feel uncomfortable, but just to point out that, as I mentioned earlier, being a Scrum product owner can be challenging. There's a lot to learn, and it's not something that these aren't skills that you can usually develop within a few days or even a few weeks. It takes months and years. I've been involved in product management and agile software development for over 20 years, and I'm still learning, and I think that's good. And so, it's maybe also a helpful model for some of you, at least those of you who work as product owners, to reflect on your skills and analyze them and see where do you have strengths and weaknesses, and where are the gaps maybe particularly significant or visible, and maybe think about then closing those gaps in whichever way is most helpful for you. So to summarize, be clear on what you own. If you are a product owner, if you have product management responsibility, some form of management responsibility, product versus feature and component, and full stack versus tactics. And for me, I've mentioned product management now a few times. The product owner is a product management role and requires product management skills along the lines just sketched. And Scrum product owners must be sufficiently empowered to succeed in their job and be able to maximize the value their products create. So I hope this was useful for you. Thank you very much for listening. You can find more information on product ownership on my website. So this is my plug. And in the books that I've written, the latest one that was published last year is called How to Lead in Product Management. And it particularly talks about those soft skills, those interpersonal and leadership skills that are valuable for product owners. And I'm very much looking forward to your questions now. But if for whatever reason your question doesn't get answered, then don't be shy and reach out to me, drop me a line. So thank you again.
I'd like to open it up. So if you have a question, feel free to use the raise hand in the reactions in Zoom, or feel free to enter it into the chat as well. Questions? On the role, maybe strategy, road mapping, responsibilities as a product owner. Kevin.
Hi, Roman. First of all, thank you for giving an excellent talk. And I also have read your book, How to Lead in Product Management. It was excellent. I really echo this with my my background. Last year, I've been spending a lot of time in nonviolent communication. So a lot of these sort of skills actually been going into that direction as well. So I've been recently talking to a few people because I've been a product coach for 6 months now. I've done 7 years of product management. And then recently been talking to people, and they seem to, especially for companies, they seem to struggle with the idea of product owners. And the complaint I'm always hearing is hey, our product owners doesn't really talk to customers and create prototypes and really validate their ideas. And I'm wondering, Roman, what are some of the causes that you've seen that actually causes product owners to not really maximizing value, and what actually really stops and what companies could do to improve that situation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you, Kevin, for asking it. It's also a question that isn't easy for me to answer. So I think there are at least two factors at play. A personal factor, or maybe several personal factors, and an organizational one. So the product management, I hope that I'm not going off too much on a tangent, but when you look at product management is a comparatively young profession. And some people say it emerged in the 1930s. Personally, I belong to the camp of people who say it probably crawled out of marketing and engineering in the 1950s. Now, when it comes to digital products, the software products, I think in the 1980s, companies started using product managers for for software products. And Microsoft, I believe, was one of the first companies to do so. So, in a digital space, product management and product managers and product roles and product people, professional product peoples are still, comparatively new-ish. Certainly when you compare them to sales people and marketeers and more established professions. And so a lot of companies, and then in addition to that, a lot of companies, several industries really think about traditionally banking and finance, think about tourism and travel, think about what else comes to mind, publishing, think of and entertainment, think about, I don't know, there's already quite a few, in those industries, traditionally, there's no product management, right? And so, suddenly, there's these agile frameworks, or there's a framework like Scrum that is being introduced, and it has a product owner, and it's like, oh my God, who are these people? Where do they come from, and where do they sit? Where do they belong? It's an organizational change and development challenge. And so some companies have addressed it really well, and other companies still struggle with it. And so I think that's sort of the organizational context, and really a limited understanding of what is product management, a limited understanding of product roles, and a limited understanding of the Scrum product owner role. And then on a personal level, sometimes product owners just lack those more strategic and customer and market focused skills. Partly maybe because they're not very visible within Scrum, or they're not explicitly required, and maybe they're not taught as much in a Scrum context. But then, I mean, personally, I've always looked at Scrum as a development framework and not as a product management framework. And so, depending on, which of those courses is more relevant, I think that would then suggest the right cure. So either more around learning and development and helping individuals develop their skills, or around establishing a product management function and empowering those individuals and creating an environment so that they can actually succeed and do a good job. And quite often those two things come together, unfortunately. Yeah. So I don't know if that was helpful.
I think it was helpful for me. It helps me understand what's your latest thinking behind such a popular problem. I've always been also wondering, right? Whether actually Scrum Masters have the skills to help product owners or product managers to skill up and being aware of this sort of thing. But again, this is just my 2 cents. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, for the question. Lithia?
Hi, Roman. Thanks for the insightful session. We got a lot of information from you. I have one question in mind. So basically, how does a product owner can handle conflicting priorities from stakeholders?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's another great question. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that a Scrum product owner shouldn't really feel obliged to implement stakeholder requests. So a product owner is not the personal assistant of the stakeholders. A product owner is not a project manager. And even a project manager usually would say, like, look, we've agreed on a specification, it's been reviewed, it's been signed. If you have additional requests, you want additional requirements, well, you'll have to go to the change control board and we'll have to talk about it. And I think, it's not uncommon for me that I talk to product owners, and, I get the feeling that the individuals feel sort of obliged to kind of please the stakeholders or do what the stakeholders request. And it's like, well, that's not how it should work. At least that's not my understanding. For me, the people in a Scrum context who are responsible for innovation are the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum Master. So it's a Scrum team. And so when you look at the Scrum process, the way it works is that the Scrum team has a maximum of 4 weeks, a sprint, to build a first product increment, something that is at least demonstrable. And then the stakeholders and selected users and customers come into the picture, and they're asked for their feedback to validate what has been done, and to check if the product increment does create enough value, if the Scrum team is on the right track or the wrong track, so that the Scrum team can then inspect and adapt. But it shouldn't be that, the stakeholders come and request and say, like, I want this, I need this, do this for me, and this is super high priority. I mean, a great thing, well, I consider it to be a great thing, at least a good thing, that the latest Scrum guide introduced is a product goal. And a product goal is the longer term objective the Scrum team works towards. And so I like to think of the product goal as a, say 2 to 3 months, roughly, benefit. Sometimes having those quarterly outcomes or benefits can work quite well. That you agree upon as the product owner with the stakeholders and the development team in a collaborative decision-making session. And any new ideas, any new requests can then be evaluated in the light of that product goal. So if the request helps reach that product goal, then it should maybe be considered, assuming that other items in the product backlog are not delivered or delivered to a lesser extent without jeopardizing the product goal. Yeah. And to say a few more words about how I like to do this, I like to not only work with one product goal, but I like to do some product road mapping and include product goals on a product roadmap for the next 9 to 12 months, and therefore anticipating them, just sort of to sketch the journey I want to take a product on, and sort of develop a shared outlook with the stakeholders and development team members on how the product could evolve. And so it's about using the right planning techniques, but also a collaborative approach where you pull in the stakeholders and development team members, or at least development team representatives, and invite them to contribute to strategic decisions and setting product goals. But at the same time, where you don't make the mistake to kind of try and please people, or kind of feel like, as I said earlier, where you shouldn't feel obliged to, meet every request. So the point is not to, satisfy the stakeholders. The point is to maximize the value that the product creates and generate as much buy-in for important product decisions from the stakeholders as you can, right? So I hope that was useful.
Thanks, Lydia, for your question. We have a question in the chat. Chanel said, you talked about how often the area to give is often the product owner's health and time. How would we begin a conversation about the right balance, especially given the business, maybe in a season of organizational change when employees lack confidence or don't feel very empowered?
Yeah, another great question. Thank you for asking it. I mean, in an ideal world, every product owner, every Scrum product owner would have a line manager, and for me, that will be typically a head of product, and the specific role that the individual plays, is called, it's referred to by different names in different organizations depending on the structure and size of the organization. But a line manager who manages a group of product people, a line manager who manages and looks after and supports a group of product owners. And in an ideal world, the line manager would help those individuals, those product owners, to practice sustainable pace and work in a way that is productive and creative and value creating, but also, conducive to or doesn't kind of damage people's mental and physical health and well-being. But in reality, that's not always the case. And so the advice that I like to give to product owners is to really look after yourself and recognize that your health is important. If you get overworked, and if you're overworked on an extended period of time, then your creativity will suffer, your productivity will suffer, you'll make more mistakes, you'll have fewer ideas. And I'm talking here from my own experience, by the way. And ultimately, you'll have to pay a price for this. And I don't want to dramatize things, but a few friends and colleagues of mine, former colleagues of mine who, worked too hard for too long on digital products, really suffered from it, and, experienced things like slip discs, or lasting food intolerances, and heart attacks and strokes. And, I don't think that's right. And for me, sustainable pace is a very important agile principle, and it does apply to product people as well. I mean, I think the Agile Manifesto includes explicitly business people. So, for me, that's product people in the application of sustainable pace. So to a certain extent, it's really about protecting yourself and, kindly but firmly pointing out how much you can do, and, and saying no. saying no, and prioritizing and setting clear and agreed product goals, sticking to those. And because one of the things I've seen with product owners, certainly when it comes to the lack of a scrum master, something I touched upon in earlier in my talk, is that a product owner would kind of try and fill that gap and fill that gap and fill that gap, but that way kind of hide an organizational impediment, as it's called in Scrum. So an opportunity for the organization to carry out, fix an issue, fix a systemic organizational issue, right? So that's not in the best interest of the product owner, and ultimately it's also not in the best interest of the organization. If there are lots of reorg, if there's a big reorg effort going on, or if people have left, then maybe what the organization needs to do is just reduce the amount of products that are currently being progressed, and that's then a product portfolio management exercise, I would suggest.
Now for your question, David.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. I appreciate the ability to listen to you one-on-one, so that's great. One of the questions that we get from our product owners in our organization is that how do they become more empowered to take ownership, where maybe you have an enterprise that seems to be delegating or handing the work to the teams, and all of a sudden that becomes the thing that's most important. How do you empower those product owners to become more autonomous drivers of what's really delivering more value back to organization? Any tips or strategies on that?
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks for asking the question. So I found there are three things that can help product owners. The first one is to increase their expertise. So that's expertise, knowledge of the product category, the domain, the market, the competitors, the players in there, be aware of the trends. But also, product management skills, the ability not only to prioritize a product backlog and write user stories, but, some of those other skills that I mentioned around product strategy. I remember well talking to a product owner, that must have been now a few years ago, and she attended one of my classes and then came up in one of the breaks and said, "Oh, Roman, I really like when you talk about product roadmaps. I wish my management would allow me to own the roadmap of my product." And so, we talked to each other, and after a short while, I said, "Oh, hold on a second, excuse me, but you've created a product roadmap before. You're quite comfortable doing it." And she looked at me really surprised and said, like, "No." And so I said to her, "Well, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem then, I guess. It'd be kind of nice for your management just to kind of be supportive and trust you. But at the same time, if your management doesn't kind of believe that you actually have the skills to do the product road mapping work and then own the product roadmap, it's kind of hard for them to, ask you to do it." So, sometimes the best thing in such a situation is then not to wait for management to change, but, change yourself by upskilling and acquiring the right skills. And these days, I think, there's nearly too much information about product ownership and product management available. It used to be very different 10, 15 years ago, I believe. But yeah, these days, there's so much information and so much free information available. So upskill, please. And, related to that is working on what is referred to as referent power. That's really sort of the trustworthiness of somebody and how likable somebody is being perceived as a human being. And, that has to do with the ability to empathize with stakeholders. It has to do and other people in the organization. It has to do with, integrity, walking your own talk and being transparent. It has to do with getting to know other people and being willing to invest in relationship building and maintaining relationships. I think that is extremely valuable, and sometimes product owners overlook that, and sometimes product owner kind of see, as I said earlier, stakeholders as people who issue requests and have to be pleased, rather than thinking that's not the way it should be. They're valuable partners for me, but we should be equal. And in fact, I should be empowered, so I should have the final say on any product decision. How can I change the dynamic? How can I change the relationship? And how can I build a more meaningful, a more healthy connection? And then the third element would be organizational development and change, and lobbying for, recognizing the role properly and establishing the role properly. And so that, when people, when stakeholders interact with a product owner, understand who's that person and, what's the role the individual is playing. But I mean, that's something, of course, that takes much more time and product owners can't control, but only influence. But that would be the realm of a Scrum Master. So, this is where Scrum Masters can be great partners and can be of great help and great value to product owners.
David, for that question.
Appreciate it.
Roman, I actually have one for you. A lot of times our business stakeholders, even customers, may not be able to relay what exactly they're looking to do or what their need is. Is there a way, are there techniques that you use that maybe draw that out from your stakeholders?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Sheena. Thank you for asking it. So the number of techniques you can use. A very popular one is to create an empathy map, and that can help really to ultimately carry out some user research and ultimately and to do things like observing people. I mentioned observation earlier, so directly observing people, how they currently get a job done, and talking to people, again, something I believe I briefly mentioned earlier. And that would then also be referred to as a problem interview. So it's not quite like in a product demo where you talk about a solution, but it's really where you kind of try and find out, what's going on here. Is the person struggling with something? So maybe to make this more specific, an example I like to use, because I hope that people can relate to it, is a healthy eating app. So if I wanted to now, I've got this great idea. I really want to build a healthy eating app. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be super beneficial, and it's going to make me rich. So it's going to be utterly amazing. And so if I wanted to do this, then it'd be good to think about, okay, who could be the potential beneficiaries? Who could be the target users? What's the audience? And once I've done this, and that usually does require some initial thinking and maybe a little bit of investigation, a little bit of market research, and maybe picking a specific group or segment. Once I've done this, then it'd be a good idea to observe how people currently eat. And if I, for instance, pick middle-aged men like myself, then observe other middle-aged men, how they eat. And it'd be good maybe to characterize those individuals with through some behavioral attributes and maybe some demographics. Some additional demographics, and then talk to them and see, not if they're interested in a healthy eating app. That'd be then more like a sales conversation, but just to understand if healthy eating is any issue for them, and if they've got any digestive issues, or if they've got any unhealthy eating related issues. And also to which extent maybe they are open to using digital products in order to improve their lifestyle, or accept health advice from digital sources and digital products. Yeah. So those would be great ways. And then I can capture my insights on an empathy map that sort of says, this is what I've heard people say. And these are some of the underlying needs and problems that are found, and then use that in order to maybe build personas at a later stage. So personas are user models, fictional characters that describe the target group or members of the target group of the audience. But again, it assumes, the whole assumption here is, or an important assumption is that people just don't come and say, like, build this product for me. If people come and say, build this product for me, they're not treating the product owner as a product owner. They're treating the product owner as a project manager. The product owner is not a project manager, right? So it means that the product owner has the ability to innovate, and is given that sort of level of authority. And, that's kind of expected. You figure out what the problem is, and you figure out what the solution might be, and we give you feedback along the way, and we help you with this. But you go ahead with a group of people.
Ben, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think we're up just about out of time. And Roman, I want to thank you. Real quick, I really appreciate the visual and the explanation of a full stack product owner. I thought that was brilliant. Any advice, coaching tips for organization that maybe has already let the horse out of the corral and has adopted a well-promoted scaling technique and is encountering problems with added layers?
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. And you know, for anybody who uses strategic and tactical product roles, you know, assuming that you want to stick with that sort of setup, do everything you can to foster a close and trustful collaboration between those roles. So I think it can be extremely valuable for safe product owners, you know, just to you know, make it more specific, to you know, be at least loosely involved in some of the strategic decision-making processes, so they understand and they have the opportunity to voice any concerns and influence. And also then, you know, for any safe product managers to understand what's happening on a more tactical level, because, you know, strategic and tactical product decisions, they have to be related, right? The strategic product decisions should guide the tactical ones, and insights from the tactical work should then help refine and change the strategy and the strategic decisions. So just to make sure that that kind of loop, that loop works, right? So that, you know, there's alignment in terms of strategic and tactical decisions. So the tactical decisions are aligned with strategic ones, and then any insights generated on the tactical level is passed up, so to speak. And I think for that, you need to make sure, you need to bring people together in whichever way is appropriate, and make sure that people, you know, have a decent connection and communicate well.
Well, thank you so much. We're at time. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and participating. Hope you can join us in the January session as well. Thank you, Roman, so much for your time. I know it's late hours possibly for you, so thank you. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I hope it was a little bit useful. And yeah, good luck to everyone with effectively applying the product owner role.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.